Ma'am, you now legally owe me $350 in back rent for living in my garage. That's what I told the HOA Karen, who'd been terrorizing our neighborhood for 8 years. The look on her face, priceless. She went from smug and entitled to completely speechless in about 2 seconds flat. This woman thought she could park her BMW in my garage whenever she wanted, hand out bogus fines like Halloween candy, and basically treat me like her personal doormat. What she didn't realize is that her entitled behavior had accidentally made her my tenant under state law. So what's the pettiest thing an HOA has ever done to you? Drop those stories in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. By day 5, she was begging to pay rent just to get her car back. Let me show you exactly how Karen's own arrogance became her downfall. My name's Jake, and 3 months ago I was just a 34-year-old IT contractor trying to start over after a messy divorce. My grandmother had left me her little house in Pine Ridge. A modest 1,960s ranch with white shutters and a detached single-car garage that smelled like old motor oil and forgotten dreams. The scent hit me every time I opened that garage door, mixing WD-40 with decades of stored Christmas decorations and the faint echo of my grandfather's woodworking projects. I'd moved in to heal, honestly, financially stretched, emotionally drained, just wanting a quiet place to rebuild my life. The house was perfect, except for the HOA. Enter Karen Whitmore, 52 years old, 8 years as HOA board treasurer, and the kind of woman who treated a clipboard like a weapon of mass destruction. She drove a white BMW X5 that she kept spotless, lived in the biggest house on our block, and had this perfectly styled bob that never moved, even in hurricane-forced winds. I swear that woman's hair had its own structural engineering degree. But here's what made Karen dangerous. She didn't just enforce HOA rules, she weaponized them. And she had a pattern. Ask anyone in Pine Ridge who'd been targeted by Karen's enforcement campaigns, and you'd notice something interesting. Single parents, elderly folks on fixed incomes, the young Hispanic family with kids who played too loudly. Anyone who didn't fit Karen's vision of suburban perfection got the treatment. My first real encounter with Karen happened on day 3 after moving in. I'm working from home, trying to focus on debugging some client's network issues, when I hear the distinctive purr of her BMW pulling into my driveway. No big deal, right? Maybe she's being neighborly, bringing a welcome basket or something. Right. I walk outside and find her BMW sitting in my garage, not near it, not beside it, inside it. She's standing there in her designer jeans and crisp white blouse, clutching that damned clipboard, looking at me like I'm the one who's lost. "Excuse me," I say, trying to be polite because I'm new and don't want neighborhood drama. "That's my garage." She looks up from her clipboard, and I can smell her perfume from 10 feet away, this overwhelming floral assault that probably costs more than my monthly grocery budget. "Emergency HOA meeting," she says, like that explains everything. "Your driveway was closest." The audacity was breathtaking. "I need to get my tools out for a client job. Could you please move your car?" Karen's heels click against the concrete as she walks past me, completely ignoring my request. "I'll move it when I'm good and ready," she says over her shoulder. "Maybe you should learn to be more community-minded." And just like that, she was gone, leaving her BMW in my garage like she owned the place. 6 hours. 6 hours her car sat there while I couldn't access my camping gear, my toolbox, anything I'd stored in there. I had to reschedule a client appointment because I couldn't get to my equipment. When Karen finally came back, no apology, no acknowledgement. She acted like she was doing me a favor by removing her car from my property. That night, I stood in my grandmother's kitchen, looking at her old photo on the windowsill, feeling like I was already failing her memory. She'd been tough, the kind of woman who'd fought the city council to get streetlights installed on our block back in the 80s. What would she think of her grandson getting pushed around by some HOA queen with a superiority complex? The crunching sound of gravel under Karen's tires as she'd finally pulled away kept echoing in my head. That sound, combined with the lingering chemical sweetness of her perfume in my garage, told me everything I needed to know about my new neighbor. This wasn't over. Karen had just declared war, and she had no idea she'd picked the wrong target. The next morning, I wake up to find 3 bright yellow violation notices taped to my front door like some kind of suburban scarlet letter. My coffee was still brewing when I peeled them off, and the morning dew made the ink slightly smudged. but not smudged enough to hide what Karen had done. Violation number 1, unapproved mailbox color. Apparently my grandmother's black mailbox violated some obscure covenant about earth tone coordination with neighborhood aesthetic standards. $50 fine. Violation number 2, excessive window coverings. My bedroom blinds were supposedly non-compliant with community visibility requirements. Another $50. Violation number 3, improper trash bin placement. My garbage can was allegedly positioned 4 inches too close to the street. You guessed it, $50 more. Each violation came with a crisp 10-day correction period and a handwritten note in Karen's perfect cursive. Welcome to the neighborhood. We maintain standards here. The passive-aggressive smiley face she'd drawn at the end made my blood pressure spike. Here's the thing about revenge. It's best served with a side of documentation. So instead of storming over to Karen's house like she probably expected, I fired up my laptop and started digging. The mechanical clicking of my keyboard at 7 in the morning probably annoyed my neighbors, but I was on a mission. First discovery: Karen had filed all 3 violations on the same day as our garage incident. Not suspicious at all, right? Second discovery: according to the HOA management company's online portal, board members needed a majority vote before issuing citations. Karen's violations? Filed unilaterally, no board approval documented anywhere. But here's where it gets interesting. I called the HOA management company directly, and after 20 minutes of hold music that sounded like elevator jazz mixed with someone's fever dream, I got connected to a tired-sounding woman named Beth. Hi, I'm calling about some violation notices I received. I wanted to confirm the filing procedures. Oh, sure, honey, what's your address? I give her my address, and I hear typing in the background. That's interesting, Beth says, and I can hear her frowning through the phone. These violations were filed by Karen Whitmore, but there's no record of board approval. Actually, looking at her filing history, this is a pattern. My coffee went cold as Beth explained that Karen had been issuing unauthorized violations for months, maybe years. The management company had been processing them automatically, assuming board approval existed. But when they started auditing files after some resident complaints, they discovered Karen had been operating like her own personal citation machine. So these violations are invalid? I asked. Technically, yes, and if you want my unofficial advice, request receipt documentation for every HOA fine you pay. Many board members pocket that cash instead of putting it in community funds. Knowledge nugget number 1, folks. Always demand itemized receipts for HOA fines and verify board approval through your management company. Unauthorized citations are more common than you'd think. But Karen wasn't done with me. Oh no, this was just the opening act. That afternoon, I'm drafting a polite but firm email to the HOA board demanding dismissal of Karen's bogus violations when I hear that familiar BMW purr in my driveway. I look out my window, and there she is again, pulling straight into my garage like she owns the place. This time, she doesn't even pretend there's an emergency. She just parks, gets out, and leaves another handwritten note under my windshield wiper. Complaints will be noted in your permanent file. Community cooperation is expected. The audacity was honestly impressive. Here I am, documenting her violation of actual laws, and she responds by violating my property again while threatening me with some imaginary permanent file like we're in elementary school. But Karen had made a crucial mistake. See, I'd installed a security camera system the day after moving in. Nothing fancy, just some basic wireless cameras I picked up online. The footage of her first garage invasion had been useful for my own records, but this second incident? This was pure gold. I now had documented proof of trespassing, evidence of retaliatory harassment, and a clear pattern of Karen treating my private property like her personal parking garage. More importantly, I had timestamps showing she was using my garage space without permission while simultaneously filing bogus violations against me. That night, I sat in my grandmother's old recliner, going through my footage and documentation. The leather was worn smooth from decades of use, and it still smelled faintly of her lavender soap. I could almost hear her voice. Jake, honey. Bullies only understand one language, strength. The coffee rain stains on my laptop screen from days of late-night research couldn't hide the truth staring back at me. Karen thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. Little did she know, I was about to change the entire game. 2 days later, Karen decided to call in reinforcements, and by reinforcements, I mean her little circle of HOA cronies, 3 other wives who apparently had nothing better to do than terrorize their neighbors for sport. First came Linda, Karen's lieutenant, driving a silver Lexus and carrying what looked like an official inspection checklist. She spent 20 minutes walking around my property, taking photos of my lawn with a dedication of a crime scene investigator. The grass was, apparently, irregularly maintained according to some subsection of the covenant I'd never heard of. Then came Patricia, clipboard in hand, measuring the exact height of my outdoor solar lights with a literal ruler. Turns out they were half an inch too tall and cast non-compliant shadows on the sidewalk. I watched this performance from my kitchen window while eating a sandwich, wondering if these women had ever considered getting actual hobbies. The grand finale was Susan, who spent 15 minutes photographing my mailbox from every conceivable angle like she was documenting evidence for the International Criminal Court. Apparently, the small dent from where the previous owner had backed into it constituted neighborhood aesthetic degradation. By noon, I had 3 more violation notices. $50 each, naturally. Karen's personal signature on every single one, along with another passive-aggressive note. Community standards benefit everyone. Compliance ensures property values. But here's where Karen's strategy backfired spectacularly. See, while her Mean Girls Club was busy playing property inspector, I was building my own network. And it turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted by the Pine Ridge Enforcement Squad. Mrs. Chen, my 78-year-old neighbor, knocked on my door that afternoon carrying a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from age, but from anger. "You want to know about Karen?" she said, settling into my grandmother's old kitchen chair. "Let me show you what she did to us." The folder contained 2 years of violation notices. $50 fines for everything from excessive garden gnome displays to unauthorized bird feeding stations. Mrs. Chen and her husband had paid over $3,000 in bogus fines before their son finally intervened and threatened legal action. But Mrs. Chen wasn't alone. She introduced me to the Rodriguez family, who'd been fined repeatedly for their kids' toys being visibly stored in their own backyard. And to Bill Henderson, a veteran in his 60s, who'd racked up hundreds in fines because Karen decided his service dog's water bowl was an unapproved outdoor fixture. The pattern was crystal clear. Karen targeted anyone who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. Elderly folks, families with young children, anyone who looked different or had less money to fight back. She was running a systematic harassment campaign, masquerading as HOA enforcement. That evening, I made a discovery that changed everything. While researching property law for my own situation, because let's be honest, I was getting desperate, I stumbled across something called adverse possession statutes. But more importantly, I found references to involuntary tenancy and landlord abandonment laws. The legal concept is actually pretty straightforward. If someone uses your property repeatedly with your knowledge, and you don't take immediate action to evict them, the law can consider them a tenant with actual legal rights. More bizarrely, if that tenant leaves personal property on your premises, specific landlord-tenant laws kick in. I spent the next 3 hours down a legal rabbit hole that would make any law student proud. My laptop screen glowed in the dark kitchen while I clicked through statute after statute, cross-referencing case law and precedents. The smell of reheated pizza mixed with the faint scent of my grandmother's lavender dish soap still lingering in the sink. Then it hit me like a lightning bolt. Karen had been using my garage repeatedly. She'd stored HOA supplies and personal items there. I had security footage documenting her access and use. Under state law, her repeated use of my property, combined with her storage of personal belongings, could legally establish a landlord-tenant relationship. Which meant Karen Whitmore, HOA board treasurer and neighborhood tyrant, had accidentally become my tenant, and she didn't even know it. The irony was absolutely delicious. Here she was, trying to control my property through bogus violations, while simultaneously creating a legal situation where I could control her through actual tenancy law. I leaned back in my grandmother's chair, listening to the old house settle around me, and started to smile for the first time in weeks. Karen thought she was playing chess while I fumbled around with checkers. She had no idea I was about to flip the entire board. Karen's next move was absolutely nuclear. 3 days after her inspection squad finished their reign of terror, I got a knock on my door that made my blood run cold. Standing on my porch was a city building inspector with a clipboard, hard hat, and the kind of expression that suggested my day was about to get much worse. "Mr. Thompson, I'm here about a complaint regarding an unpermitted structure and potential zoning violations." My heart sank. "I'm sorry, what?" The inspector, a middle-aged guy named Rodriguez, consulted his paperwork. "We received a report that you're operating an illegal business from your garage, violating residential zoning ordinances. Also claims of structural modifications without permits." I stood there in my coffee-stained t-shirt, trying to process what I was hearing. The morning air carried the scent of autumn leaves and impending doom. "Business? What business?" "IT consulting, according to the complainant. Report says you've made unauthorized modifications, including additional electrical work and ventilation systems." The pieces clicked together like a puzzle made of pure malice. Karen had called the city, fabricated lies about me running a business from my garage, and was trying to get my property re-tagged. This woman had escalated from petty HOA harassment to potentially making my home uninhabitable. But here's the thing about being an IT guy, we're really good at documentation. "Can I ask who filed the complaint?" I said, already knowing the answer. Rodriguez flipped through his papers. "Karen Whitmore, HOA board member. She provided quite a detailed report, with photos and timestamps." Of course she did. I spent the next hour walking Rodriguez through my property records. Turns out my garage was built in 1962, fully permitted and documented in the city's own archives. I pulled up the original construction permits on the city website while Rodriguez watched, his expression shifting from official skepticism to professional annoyance. "These records show the garage was legally constructed," he said, comparing his paperwork to my screen, "and I don't see any evidence of commercial activity." Then I showed him something that made his jaw tighten. Karen's complaint contained multiple demonstrably false statements. Not just wrong, but intentionally fabricated. She'd claimed I'd added electrical outlets for industrial equipment when the outlets were original to the 1962 construction. She'd reported commercial-grade ventilation systems that were actually just the standard garage door opener my grandfather had installed in the 80s. "Mr. Thompson," Rodriguez said, closing his folder with a decisive snap that echoed in the quiet garage, "filing false reports with the city is a serious matter. This complaint appears to contain multiple deliberate inaccuracies." But Karen wasn't done. While Rodriguez was finishing his inspection, guess whose white BMW came purring into my driveway? Karen herself, probably expecting to watch my garage get condemned. Instead, she walked into a scene where a city inspector was documenting her false statements. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rodriguez called out as Karen approached, "I need to ask you about this report you filed." The color drained from Karen's face faster than water down a drain. "Oh, well, I was just concerned about community safety and property values. Your report claims unauthorized electrical work, but city records show all electrical was installed during original construction. You also reported commercial ventilation that doesn't exist. Can you explain these discrepancies?" Karen started stammering about just trying to help and maintaining community standards, but Rodriguez wasn't buying it. He explained that false reports waste city resources and can result in financial penalties. Watching Karen squirm under official scrutiny was like watching a vampire meet sunlight. All her confidence evaporated the moment she faced someone with actual power who wasn't intimidated by her clipboard. But this confrontation gave me something even more valuable than satisfaction. It gave me the final piece of my legal puzzle. That night, I called my buddy Rick, a lawyer who owed me a favor from when I'd fixed his office network during their ransomware crisis. I explained Karen's escalating harassment pattern, her repeated unauthorized use of my garage, and her attempts to damage my property. "Jake," Rick said after listening to my story, "what you're describing sounds like she might have accidentally created a landlord-tenant relationship. How's that work?" "She's been using your garage repeatedly, storing her stuff there, treating it like her own space. If you can document consistent use over time, there's legal precedent for involuntary tenancy." My heart started racing. What would that mean? It means she could legally be your tenant, you could demand back rent, establish formal lease terms, or initiate eviction proceedings. Document everything because this could get very interesting. I hung up and looked around my grandmother's kitchen, feeling her fighting spirit coursing through my veins. The scent of her old lavender soap still lingered faintly, mixing with the smell of cold pizza I'd forgotten on the counter. Karen thought she could destroy my life with lies and intimidation. She had no idea she'd just handed me the keys to her own downfall. The next morning, I sat in Rick's cramped law office that smelled like old leather and fresh coffee, watching him flip through printouts of my security footage and documentation. His desk was covered with law books and empty energy drink cans. "Jake, this is actually incredible," Rick said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Karen's repeated use of your garage absolutely meets the criteria for involuntary tenancy under state law." He pulled out a thick legal manual and started reading. "Look at this. When an individual uses private property repeatedly with the owner's knowledge, stores personal belongings on said property, and establishes a pattern of regular access, the law may recognize an implied landlord-tenant relationship." My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying Karen Whitmore has been your unauthorized tenant for 6 weeks, and she doesn't even know it." Rick grinned like a shark. "Better yet, she's been storing HOA supplies in your garage. Under landlord-tenant law, that's abandoned property if she leaves it without paying rent." The legal implications hit me like a freight train. "So what does that mean?" Rick started counting on his fingers. "First, you can demand back rent for her use of the space. Fair market rate for garage storage is about $150 a month. She's been using your garage for 6 weeks, so that's roughly $225 in back rent. But wait, there's more," he continued. "Late fees, inconvenience charges, and utility costs bring her total debt to around $350. And here's the beautiful part. As her landlord, you have legal rights to secure the property if rent isn't paid." My head was spinning. Secure the property? You can legally lock the garage with her stuff inside until she pays what she owes. It's called a landlord's lien. And if she doesn't pay within the statutory notice period, you can dispose of the abandoned property. The irony was perfect. Karen had been using my garage like she owned it, treating me like some powerless victim. Instead, her entitled behavior had accidentally made her my tenant with real legal obligations. "But here's the most beautiful part," Rick said. "Look at your security footage timestamps. Karen's been accessing your garage using her own key." I blinked. Her own key? She had to get that key somewhere. Either she made an unauthorized copy or someone gave her access. Either way, it proves she's been treating your garage like her personal storage unit. Rick pulled out a legal form and started writing. "We're going to serve her with a formal notice of tenancy and rent demand. Certified mail, completely by the book. She'll have 7 days to respond after receiving notice." The smell of his coffee mixed with musty law books as Rick explained the timeline. She can pay the back rent and establish a formal lease, dispute the tenancy claim in court, or face eviction proceedings. And she ignores it? Then we file for eviction, and her BMW becomes collateral for unpaid rent. Rick's grin got wider. "Jake, she walked right into the most perfect legal trap I've ever seen." I sat there in stunned silence, feeling like I'd discovered I'd been playing chess while thinking it was checkers. Karen's harassment, her garage use, her storage of items, it had all been building toward this moment where her behavior gave me legal power over her. Knowledge nugget number 2. Property law is complex, but repeated use of someone's space with storage of personal items can create involuntary tenancy relationships that give landlords significant legal rights. Rick handed me the completed notice. "Welcome to being Karen's landlord, Jake. Something tells me she's not going to take this well." Over the next 3 days, I assembled what I like to call my Justice League, a ragtag team of neighbors who'd been waiting years for someone to finally stand up to Karen's reign of terror. First recruit, Mrs. Chen, who showed up at my door with a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet and eyes that sparkled with the kind of revenge only a 78-year-old grandmother can properly execute. "Jake, honey," she said, settling into my kitchen, "I've been keeping records for 2 years. Karen targeted my rose garden, my bird feeders, even my grandson's bicycle. Time to use this." Mrs. Chen's documentation was incredible. Photos, timestamps, copies of every bogus violation notice. She'd even recorded some of Karen's aggressive confrontations on her phone. The woman was basically a one-person surveillance operation disguised as a sweet elderly neighbor. Next came the Rodriguez family, Maria and Carlos, along with their 8-year-old twins who'd been fined repeatedly for having the audacity to own toys. Carlos worked in construction and understood property law better than most lawyers. "Man, what you're doing is genius," Carlos said, reviewing Rick's legal strategy. "Karen's been acting like she owns everyone's property. Time she learned about actual ownership rights." Maria pulled out her own folder. She fined us $200 last month because Elena's chalk art was defacing community sidewalks. It was hopscotch squares. Then there was Bill Henderson, the 63-year-old veteran whose service dog had been declared an unapproved outdoor fixture by Karen's twisted interpretation of HOA rules. Bill brought experience dealing with bureaucratic nonsense and unshakable calm. "Son," Bill said, examining Rick's legal paperwork, "this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You're using her own weapons against her." My secret weapon was Rick's legal expertise. He spent hours walking us through landlord-tenant law, explaining our rights and Karen's obligations in simple terms. "Here's the beautiful thing about involuntary tenancy," Rick explained to our group gathered in my living room. "It's not some obscure legal loophole. It's established law designed to protect property owners from exactly this situation." He pulled out a whiteboard and started drawing diagrams. Step 1, serve the notice of tenancy via certified mail. Step 2, wait for Karen's response. Step 3, document everything she does afterward. The technical preparation was where my IT background really shined. I upgraded my security camera system, installed audio recording capabilities, and set up automatic cloud backup. Every interaction with Karen would be documented in high definition with crystal clear audio. Knowledge nugget number 3, when dealing with property disputes, comprehensive documentation trumps everything. Courts love timestamps, video evidence, and certified mail delivery confirmations. Mrs. Chen suggested we coordinate our response. If Karen retaliates against Jake, she'll probably escalate her harassment of all of us. We need to be ready. So we created a neighborhood communication network, group text messages, shared photo folders, coordinated documentation. If Karen tried to target any of us, the others would immediately start recording. Carlos came up with the brilliant idea of researching fair market rental rates. If this goes to court, you want rock solid numbers. I know 3 different storage facilities we can get quotes from. We discovered that garage storage space in our area rented for between $140 and $160 per month. Karen's 6 weeks of usage, plus late fees and utility costs, easily justified the $350 demand Rick had calculated. Bill suggested we research Karen's own property for potential violations. "Know your enemy," he said with military precision. "If she wants to play by HOA rules, let's make sure she's following them herself." That investigation was enlightening. Karen's own property had at least 4 violations she'd somehow never cited herself for. An unapproved garden shed, outdoor lighting that exceeded height restrictions, and a mailbox that didn't match the approved color palette. The psychological preparation was just as important. Rick coached me on staying calm during confrontations, documenting everything, and never losing my temper, no matter how outrageous Karen's behavior became. "She's going to escalate when she gets this notice," Rick warned. "Expect the absolute worst behavior you've ever seen from her. But that's actually good. The more unhinged she gets, the better your case becomes." Mrs. Chen patted my hand with the confidence of someone who'd raised 6 children. "Honey, bullies like Karen have been getting away with their behavior for so long, they've forgotten that actions have consequences. Time to remind her." As we finished our planning session, I looked around my grandmother's living room at this unlikely alliance. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air and the determined expressions on everyone's faces. Karen had spent years dividing and conquering this neighborhood through fear and intimidation. She was about to discover what happens when her victims finally unite and fight back with actual legal weapons. The certified mail notice was delivered on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m. I know this because Karen's reaction was so spectacular that 3 different neighbors texted me the exact timestamp of when she started screaming in her driveway. The notice was beautiful in its simplicity. Official letterhead, legal language, and a clear message. Notice of landlord-tenant relationship and demand for rent. Rick had crafted it perfectly, explaining that Karen owed me $350 for her unauthorized garage use. Karen's first response came exactly 43 minutes after delivery. I was working when I heard her BMW screech into my driveway with the fury of a woman whose worldview had just shattered. The pounding on my door sounded like someone trying to break it down. I calmly activated my security cameras, made sure my phone was recording, and opened the door to find Karen's face contorted in a shade of red I didn't know was humanly possible. "This is harassment," she shrieked, waving the legal notice like it was on fire. "This is frivolous. This is insane." "Good morning, Karen," I said with practiced calm. "I see you received the notice. You have 7 days to respond according to state law. You can't just declare me your tenant. That's not how this works." I pulled out my phone and showed her security footage of her repeated garage use. "Actually, Karen, that's exactly how involuntary tenancy law works. You used my property repeatedly, stored your belongings there, and established a pattern of access." Watching Karen's entitled confidence crumble was like watching a controlled demolition. She'd spent so long bullying people who didn't know their rights that she'd never encountered someone who actually understood the law. It was emergency parking," she stammered. 23 separate occasions over 6 weeks, I replied, consulting my documentation. "That's not emergency parking, Karen. That's regular use of private property without permission." Karen's voice reached a pitch that probably scared neighborhood dogs. "I'll sue you. I'll have you arrested. I'll get you kicked out of this neighborhood." "Feel free to call the police," I said, gesturing to my security cameras. "I'm sure they'd be interested in reviewing the footage of your repeated trespassing." That's when Karen made her first critical error. Instead of walking away to consult a lawyer, she decided to escalate. Right there in front of my cameras, with perfect audio recording, she made threats that would look horrible in court. "You have no idea who you're messing with," she snarled. "I have connections. I'll make your life hell. I'll have city inspectors here every week." I just smiled and held up my phone. "All being recorded, Karen, but please continue." The realization that she was being documented hit her like a slap. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw the real Karen, not the confident HOA enforcer, but a petty tyrant who'd never been challenged. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next 3 days, she launched a desperate scorched earth campaign. She filed complaints with the city about my illegal parking structure. She reported my security cameras as privacy violations. She even called the fire department, claiming my garage was a fire hazard. Each complaint was more ridiculous than the last. The city inspector, who'd already cleared my garage, sent back a form letter basically saying, "Stop wasting our time." The fire department found nothing wrong except Karen's own storage violations. But here's where Karen's desperation really showed. She started targeting my allies. Mrs. Chen received 2 new violation notices for excessive garden ornamentation. The Rodriguez family got cited for unauthorized children's equipment in their backyard. Bill Henderson was threatened with fines for his service dog's water bowl. The beautiful thing was we were ready. Our communication network lit up every time Karen made a move. Photos, timestamps, witnesses, we documented everything with precision. Carlos texted me a photo of Karen measuring his kids' playground equipment with a ruler at 6 in the morning. Mrs. Chen sent video of Karen screaming at her rose bushes like they had personally offended her. Bill calmly recorded Karen arguing with his service dog about municipal water regulations. But Karen's biggest mistake was underestimating how fed up the entire neighborhood had become. Word of our legal strategy spread like wildfire. Other residents started coming forward with their own Karen horror stories and documentation. By Thursday, Karen had managed to turn herself from the neighborhood enforcer into the neighborhood pariah. Her desperate attempts to intimidate us had backfired spectacularly, creating a paper trail of harassment that would make any lawyer salivate. The smell of autumn leaves filled the air as I watched Karen's support network crumble. Even her usual allies were starting to distance themselves from her increasingly erratic behavior. She had 5 days left to respond to my notice, and instead of getting legal advice, she was digging herself deeper into a hole with every desperate move. Karen was about to learn that when you declare war on someone who knows the law, you better make sure you can win. I blinked slowly, processing the sheer audacity. She'd actually called state housing authorities and filed false reports claiming I was running an illegal rental operation. "I'm sorry," I said, pulling out my phone to start recording, "but this is a single-family residence. I live here alone." Karen's face lit up with smug satisfaction. "Then explain why you've been demanding rent from residents of this community." There it was, Karen's trap. She thought she was being clever, using my legal notice against me. In her twisted logic, if I was demanding rent from her, I must be operating an illegal rental business. The housing inspector looked confused. Sir, do you rent out portions of your property? No, I replied calmly, but I do have an involuntary tenant who's been using my garage without permission for 6 weeks. Karen's smugness faltered. That's not, you can't just... Actually, I continued, addressing the inspector, under state landlord-tenant law, repeated unauthorized use of private property can establish a tenancy relationship. I showed the inspector my documentation, security footage of Karen's repeated garage use, timestamps, photos of her personal items stored in my garage, the legal notice Rick had prepared. This woman has been trespassing repeatedly, I explained. My research revealed that her pattern of use actually made her my involuntary tenant under state law. The inspector studied my documentation with growing interest. Ma'am, she said, turning to Karen, did you file a false report about illegal boarding house operations? Karen's face went through several color changes before settling on a sickly shade of green. I was just... Community safety, he's harassing residents. Ma'am, filing false reports with state agencies is a serious offense, the inspector said firmly. This appears to be a private property dispute, not a housing code violation. The woman with the camera, probably a private investigator Karen had hired, quietly started backing toward their car. Even she could see this was going sideways fast. But here's where Karen made her biggest mistake. Instead of cutting her losses, she doubled down with a screaming meltdown that was spectacular even by her standards. This is all lies, she shrieked. He's manipulating you. I'm a respected member of this community. I've been on the HOA board for 8 years. The inspector stepped back as Karen's voice reached glass-breaking levels. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down. I will not calm down. This man is destroying our neighborhood. He's a troublemaker. He doesn't belong here. And there was Karen's mask, completely off. Her true feelings about who belonged in her neighborhood exposed for everyone to hear. The inspector's expression shifted from professional courtesy to obvious discomfort. Mrs. Chen chose that perfect moment to walk over with a plate of cookies in a manila folder. Officer, she said sweetly, I have 2 years of records showing this woman's harassment of elderly residents. Behind her came Carlos with his own folder, then Bill with his service dog and a stack of bogus violation notices. Within minutes, Karen was surrounded by neighbors with evidence of her systematic abuse. The inspector looked around at this impromptu evidence presentation and then back at Karen, who was still ranting about property values. Ma'am, the inspector said to Karen, I think you need to leave. Now. As Karen's hired help beat a hasty retreat to their cars, she made one final threat that sealed her fate. You haven't heard the last of this. I'll have you all evicted. I'll call immigration. The inspector held up her hand. Ma'am, stop talking. You're making this much worse for yourself. Karen finally seemed to realize she was standing in a hole she dug herself, surrounded by witnesses and recording devices, having just threatened multiple residents with harassment based on perceived immigration status. The smell of autumn air mixing with the acrid scent of Karen's burning bridges filled my nostrils as I watched her storm back to her BMW. She had less than 48 hours left to respond to my legal notice, and instead of hiring a lawyer, she'd just created enough evidence to bury herself in court. Sunday evening arrived with the finality of a judge's gavel. Karen had exactly 12 hours left to respond to my legal notice, and instead of paying or negotiating, she'd chosen the nuclear option, calling an emergency HOA board meeting to address the crisis threatening our community. The community center was packed like a sold-out concert. 40-plus residents filled every chair, with more standing along the walls. I spotted a reporter from the local newspaper in the back corner, camera ready. Word had spread about Karen's spectacular meltdown with the housing inspector, and apparently half the neighborhood wanted front-row seats to the finale. Karen sat at the head table with the remaining 3 board members, looking like a general preparing for her last stand. Her perfectly styled hair was showing stress cracks, and her usual confident smile had been replaced by the tight-lipped expression of someone who knows they're about to face a firing squad. This emergency meeting, Karen announced, her voice echoing through the room with forced authority, has been called to address the disruptive and litigious behavior that's threatening the very foundation of our community. She gestured dramatically in my direction. Jake Thompson has been harassing board members, filing frivolous legal claims, and attempting to extort money from longtime residents through intimidation tactics. A murmur ran through the crowd. Karen was playing to her base, trying to frame this as a community Vesser outsider narrative, but she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She didn't know about our documentation network. I stood up slowly, Rick beside me, with a briefcase full of evidence. May I respond to these allegations? Karen's smile was venomous. Mr. Thompson, this is a closed board meeting. Residents may observe but not participate unless invited to speak. Actually, said board member Patricia Martinez, who'd clearly grown tired of Karen's power trips. Any resident has the right to address the board during emergency meetings. It's in our bylaws. Karen's face flushed red, but she couldn't argue with her own rules. Fine, but keep it brief. I walked to the front of the room, feeling every eye on me. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, mixing with the nervous energy of 40 neighbors who'd been waiting years for this moment. Thank you, I began, pulling out my phone. I'd like to start by playing some audio from Friday's incident with the state housing inspector. The room went dead silent as Karen's voice filled the speakers. I will not calm down. This man is destroying our neighborhood. He's a troublemaker. He doesn't belong here. Then came the immigration threats, crystal clear and high-definition audio. The room collectively winced as they heard their HOA treasurer threatening residents based on perceived immigration status in front of a government official. That's taken out of context, Karen shrieked, jumping to her feet. I was defending our community. From what? I asked calmly. From me legally demanding rent for your unauthorized use of my garage? I pulled out Rick's legal documentation and began reading. Karen Whitmore has used my garage without permission on 23 documented occasions over 6 weeks. She's stored personal belongings and HOA supplies on my property. Under state landlord-tenant law, this establishes an involuntary tenancy relationship. The crowd was hanging on every word. Mrs. Chen stood up in the back, holding her manila folder like a weapon. May I add something? She called out sweetly. Karen looked panicked. This isn't the time. Let her speak, said board member David Kim, who'd apparently decided Karen had dug her own grave deep enough. Mrs. Chen walked to the front with the practiced grace of someone who'd testified at city council meetings for decades. I have 2 years of documentation showing Karen's systematic harassment of elderly residents, families with children, and anyone she decided didn't belong in this neighborhood. She opened her folder and began reading violation notices, excessive garden gnome displays, unauthorized bird feeding stations, improper cultural decorations during holiday celebrations. The crowd was getting restless. People were whispering, pointing, clearly recognizing their own harassment experiences in Mrs. Chen's testimony. Carlos Rodriguez stood up next. She fined us $200 because my daughter drew hopscotch squares with chalk. Bill Henderson's voice carried from the back. She tried to make me pay $50 because my service dog's water bowl was an unapproved outdoor fixture. One by one, residents began standing up and sharing their Karen stories. The floodgates had opened, and 8 years of suppressed anger and frustration came pouring out. Karen tried desperately to regain control. This is character assassination. I've served this community faithfully for 8 years. That's when the reporter spoke up. Mrs. Whitmore, can you comment on the false reports you filed with city and state agencies? The room erupted. Cameras were flashing. Neighbors were shouting questions. Karen looked around wildly, realizing she was completely surrounded by hostile witnesses and documentation of her abuse. Board member Martinez called for order. Given the allegations presented tonight, I motion for Karen Whitmore's immediate suspension from the HOA board, pending a full investigation. Seconded, said Kim immediately. All in favor? Martinez called. 3 hands shot up instantly. Karen's hand remained conspicuously down. Karen stood there for a moment, surrounded by the ruins of her suburban kingdom, looking like a dictator who just realized the revolution had succeeded. This isn't over, she said quietly, but her voice carried no authority anymore, just the hollow desperation of someone who'd lost everything. As Karen gathered her things and walked toward the exit, Rick leaned over and whispered the perfect mic drop line. Mrs. Whitmore, you have until midnight to pay the $350 in back rent, or we file eviction proceedings first thing Monday morning. The sound of her heels clicking on the linoleum floor echoed through the silent room as Pine Ridge's 8-year reign of terror finally came to an end. At 11:47 p.m. that Sunday night, exactly 13 minutes before my legal deadline, I heard the familiar purr of Karen's BMW pulling into my driveway one last time. But this wasn't the entitled Karen who'd first invaded my garage months ago. This was the broken woman, clutching an envelope like it contained her soul. Through my security cameras, I watched her walk slowly to my door, her perfect posture, finally showing the weight of her spectacular downfall. The knock was soft, almost apologetic. When I opened the door, Karen stood there with red-rimmed eyes and an envelope in her trembling hand. "The money?" she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. $350, cash. I opened the envelope and counted the bills. All there, down to the last dollar. "Thank you, Karen. This settles your back rent." She nodded stiffly and turned to leave, but then stopped. For just a moment I thought she might apologize or acknowledge the damage she'd caused. Instead, she said, "You won't be seeing me anymore. I'm moving to Florida next month." And just like that, Karen Whitmore disappeared into the night, leaving Pine Ridge forever. The immediate aftermath was like watching a neighborhood wake up from a bad dream. Within 48 hours of Karen's resignation, the HOA board called an emergency audit of all fines collected over the past 2 years. They discovered Karen had pocketed over $4,000 in unauthorized citations, money that legally belonged to the community fund. The management company immediately refunded every bogus fine Karen had issued. Mrs. Chen got back her $3,000. The Rodriguez family recovered their $200. Bill Henderson was refunded for his service dog violations. Even I got back the $150 Karen had tried to extort from me with her fake violations. But the real transformation was in the community itself. With Karen gone, neighbors started talking to each other again. Kids played in their yards without fear of violation notices. Mrs. Chen's garden gnomes returned to their posts like tiny sentinels, celebrating victory. The new HOA board, led by Patricia Martinez, implemented what they called the Karen protocols: transparency requirements, board vote mandates for all citations, and a community ombudsman to prevent future abuse. They even installed a suggestion box at the community center for residents to report harassment without fear of retaliation. 3 weeks after Karen's departure, something beautiful happened. I was working in my garage finally and completely mine, when Mrs. Chen knocked on the door. "Jake, honey," she said, carrying a plate of homemade cookies that smelled like heaven, "we're organizing a block party for next Saturday. Will you help?" That block party became the first annual Pine Ridge Community Festival. 50 families showed up. Carlos brought his famous barbacoa. Bill's service dog got belly rubs from a dozen kids. Even the reporter from the local newspaper came back to write a follow-up story about neighborhood healing. But the best part? We raised enough money to install a playground where Karen's beloved aesthetic standards once prohibited children's laughter. The kids love it, and their happy screams echo through the neighborhood every afternoon like a symphony of freedom. 6 months later, I got a call from a lawyer in Tampa. Apparently, Karen had tried her old tricks in her new Florida community, targeting an elderly Cuban family with bogus violations. But this time, her victims were ready. They'd found my story online and used my legal strategy to turn the tables on her. "Involuntary tenancy," the lawyer chuckled over the phone. "Brilliant strategy. Karen's been their tenant for 2 months and doesn't even know it yet." Some things never change. As for me, I started a small consulting business, helping other communities deal with HOA abuse. Turns out, there are Karens everywhere, and most people don't know their rights. My website, fightyourhoa.com, gets thousands of visits from desperate homeowners looking for hope. Knowledge nugget number 4. Community bullies rely on isolation and ignorance, but when neighbors unite and understand their legal rights, even the most entrenched tyrants can be defeated. Every morning I still have my coffee in my grandmother's kitchen, looking at her photo on the windowsill. But now, I'm not failing her memory. I'm honoring it. She'd be proud to know her grandson learned to fight City Hall, or in this case, HOA hell. The garage still smells like motor oil and forgotten dreams, but now it also holds the sweet scent of victory. Karen's BMW may be gone, but the legal precedent remains. Park in someone's garage long enough, and you might just become their tenant. So what's the pettiest thing an HOA has ever done to you? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and sometimes they become case studies for my consulting work. And hey, if you enjoyed watching Karen get her comeuppance through the power of actual law, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Next week, I'm telling you about the Walmart manager who tried to make company policy disappear, a Karen who wanted to return a turkey skeleton on Black Friday. Trust me, you won't want to miss that one.